Our topic, of course, is the West Bank, Gaza, and the peace process. We appreciate the Minister joining us on short notice. His ambassador is departing almost at this minute for the Middle East, and we have every hope that he will join us at a time not too distant in the future. Our guest is a graduate of Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He holds his PhD from the London School of Economics. He specialized in Egyptian history. He was an officer in the Israeli Defense Forces from 1962 to 66. He then joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He was a member of the Israeli delegation to the United Nations. He served as first secretary at the embassy in London. He has been deputy director of the Middle Eastern Affairs Department within the ministry. He was deputy director of Egyptian Affairs, and he played an active role in the negotiation of the agreements following the historical agreements with Egypt. He has served on as counselor of congressional affairs at the embassy in Washington. He was chief of staff for Foreign Affairs and Defense, the committee of that title in the Knesset. And he has served as director of the North American Affairs Department within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, before being appointed to his present position in the embassy. He brings with him a reputation as being an insider. He's a man who's in daily contact with the Department of State, and his reputation for thoughtfulness and eloquence is established. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce to you the Minister of the Embassy of Israel, Dr. Eran.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As a student of international affairs, I am very pleased to see such a big audience interested in the issues on which pertain to the field of international relations. And I think that maybe part of political solutions is political involvement of the people. And the more people know, the more people are knowledgeable about certain issues, in the long run it's easier to solve many problems. I think that there is already one positive development as a result of the peace initiative of the administration, and that is that the Israeli ambassador went home, and I was ordained as the number one. Ordained is the wrong verb nowadays. The ambassador has agreed to speak about the West Bank, Gaza, and the peace process. That will get him into trouble with some parts of the government because he agreed to speak about the West Bank and not about Judea and Samaria. But secondly, I, as a loyal number two, I will follow and I will speak about the same issue. I want to put it in a wider perspective, and I'm quite certain that I leave some issues in my opening remarks unanswered, but don't hesitate and ask the questions, and I promise that I'll answer all of your questions. The question is, or one of the questions, why now? What has happened that created this sudden eruption? And my answer, which is no better than other answers given elsewhere, is divided into several reasons. One, we are dealing now with a conflict of not 20 and not 40, but more than 100 years old. And during these years, or during this century, the Jewish community was able, A, to return to Zion, to our ancestral land, B, to develop economically, and C, to develop politically. And the Palestinians have failed to do that, especially on the political field. And basically, it was their own doing. In 1917, the Jewish community was promised a homeland by the British government, which was then in control of the area following in the wake of the First World War. It wasn't a fully independent state for the Jews, but the Jewish leadership did take it because this was available at that time. In 1947, the UN, United Nations, decided on a partition plan of the area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean to two states, an Arab state and a Jewish state. If you look at the map of the partition, accepting it amounted to committing suicide. But we accepted it. This was the best available solution at the time. The Palestinians, or rather the Arab states then in existence, told the Palestinians, do not accept it, you'll get sometimes, somewhere, something better. And so the Palestinians find themselves today, after a century, being controlled by the Israelis. 20 years ago it was by the Jordanians, 40 years ago it was by the British, and 70 years ago it was by the Turks or the Ottomans. And this frustration has accumulated and found expression, or one of the ways they found expression was in the recent events. Second reason is the Arab Summit in Amman, which took place in November last year. For the last 3 decades at least, the Palestinian issue was the number one on the Arab agenda. Not that they really cared about the Palestinian refugees, but they cared to use this Palestinian issue as a trump card in the conflict with Israel. For the first time, the Arab states in November '87 relegated the Palestinian issue because they found what worries them more than the Palestinian issue, and that is the Iran-Iraq war and the situation in the Gulf, and the Islamic fundamentalism as expressed by the aggression of Iran. And to those who were used to the Palestinian issue being the number one issue, it was a very severe blow. This is another reason. Third one is the impact of Islamic fundamentalism in the region, Middle East generally. We find now leaflets being distributed on the West Bank and Gaza, printed by, or written and printed by PLO, communists sometime, and Muslim fundamentalists. We thought that it's confined only to Lebanon, outside Iran itself, but it isn't. And this is an issue which I'm afraid we are going to hear about in the very near future, more and more. We are not the only country which will face this issue in the region. I think that the Egyptians are concerned with that phenomena, and so are the other states in the Gulf. Fourthly, there was this notion that since '88 is a year of elections both in Israel and the United States, it's not a very good year to start a serious political process leading to a solution of the conflict. So '87 went by, ending with this Amman summit and the summit between the two superpowers which didn't deal with the Middle East. '88 was supposed to be the year of elections, and before you have an administration in place in the United States, it's already the middle of '89. And if you are already frustrated by years and decades of nothing happening, then it adds only to your frustration. I think that these are the reasons, the background. There was a match which ignited all this, and I will not go into it, it's not relevant. A road accident. As I said, it's irrelevant. What you needed is just a small match. I come now to Israel, or Israel's handling of the riots and the disturbances. To begin with, we have a small standing army. Most of the army in times of emergency is a civilian army which we mobilize in the first 24, 48 hours if we are successful. We don't have the luxury of having an ordinary army to fight Syria or in the past Egypt or Jordan, and then another army which will deal with the quote-unquote occupied territories. Indeed, 2 weeks after the beginning of the disturbances, I was called to the State Department and they said, you know, stop using live ammunition. And I said, so what do we do? And they referred me to the South Korean riot control police. We don't have this luxury of having riot control police. I saw the pictures on TV here from the demonstrations in Seoul, capital of Korea, where you have this massive human wall walking into the demonstrators with shields and helmets and clubs. We don't have it, and we can't afford it. So you have an army of 18 years kids. We have a compulsory service between 18 and 21, and they have to deal with the demonstrations of the same age demonstrators, most of the time even younger than that. Small groups, provoked most of the time by stones, by ugly scenes, one kind of another or another. And I admit there were cases, some very disturbing cases of excessive use of force, whether live ammunition or clubs, for that matter. There may have been a gray area in the beginning where instructions were not very clear, and the government took the measures to make it very clear recently to everyone who was engaged in this unfortunate exercise. Some could say, or any of you could say to me, Well, we understand that you are there, and you are there until there is a political solution. Well, why do you have to be in every village? Why do you have to have this engagement, the daily engagement with the civilian population? You have a legitimate security interest. Take care of it. Have a number of tanks on the Jordan River, on the borders. Let the population do whatever it wants. Why do you have to force shop owners to open their shops, as we have seen on the screens of the TV here? And the answer is, there's one simple answer, and that is, we are the government in control until there is a different solution. And in this respect, we have to maintain law and order. Pressed for time, and you have 15 seconds on TV, as I had before I came in, this is what I said. But it's not the full answer. And the answer is that what is at stake is the success of the political process. Because what happens is that the shopkeepers do not close their shop. Some of them do, but majority of them do not do that because they identify with the 13, 14, or 25 is stone throwers. They do it because they are intimidated. Because they get instructions to do that. In 1977, Sadat came to Jerusalem, and the Palestinians wanted, some Palestinian notables wanted to see him. And they didn't. Not because they refused to see them, but because they got telephone calls threatening them. And so it is a message that we send either by being or not being there. And if we say, we don't care about your mayor of Nablus or your mayor of Bethlehem, we don't give you any protection if you decide to go and meet Secretary of State Schultz next week when he comes to the Middle East. If you go and those who throw stones at Israeli soldiers do the same to you or take harsher measures against you, this is your responsibility, we don't care. This is one message, possible. But then there is no peace process. Let me go from here to this, what is called the peace process. To begin with, I think that the administration was always interested in doing something in the Middle East. I think that circumstances, political circumstances, have changed the order of priorities. Mostly East-West relationship, INF, especially Latin America, Persian Gulf, and so Middle East was relegated. To some extent, the administration was frustrated in 82, 83 by events in the Middle East when it did attempt to reach agreements. In 82, President Reagan came out September 1st with his initiative. We had misgivings that we said no, but the Arabs also said no, especially King Hussein, who was consulted prior to the declaration of this policy. And in spite of being consulted, he said no at the end. In 83, Israel and Lebanon, with the active participation of Secretary of State Schultz, signed an agreement, in the wake of which Israel pulled out of Lebanon. The government of Lebanon, which signed the agreement, made it null and void under the pressure of the Syrians. There was no one hurt more than Secretary of State Schultz. So these led to some, I would say, a long period of thinking about this issue in the administration. I suppose that the events in Judea, Samaria, and West and Gaza Strip have rekindled the interest and the feeling that there is need to do something urgently. As the Secretary of State said, since this is a long-standing conflict, you can't come and, I paraphrase now, invent electricity. That is that most of the possible solutions have been discussed one way or another. And he referred basically to Camp David, which was an agreement reached between Israel, Egypt, and the United States in '78, which basically said, let's talk about the solution in two stages. An interim one for a period of 5 years, during which the Palestinians receive self-rule or autonomy, and a final status solution, negotiations for which should start 3 years from the beginning of this autonomy. The Palestinians did not accept that. That is, I should do justice to the Palestinians. The PLO did not accept it. The Jordanians rejected it. And so for a while the Egyptians were negotiating because no other Arab would come, and nothing came out of it. But the idea, or the ideas were there, or are there. And so what the administration, if I may divulge what the administration is doing, is taking this basic idea and tries to condense it. And that is basically with what Secretary of State, or what Secretary of State is carrying to the Middle East when he goes there this weekend for a week of shuttling between Jerusalem, Amman, Cairo, Damascus. He has some agreement on some elementary issues before he goes, and some disagreement. To begin with, nobody in the area believes that there is a military solution to the conflict. I think it's very important to restore law and order to the territories in question, but I don't think that nobody in Israel thinks or believes that this is the solution, that even if we restore it, that will be the solution. We do realize that we need a political process for that. We also understand that there is a need to have the parties to the conflict talking to each other. That is, that there is no way the Soviet Union and the United States can reach an agreement and then they will go and impose it on the parties and the parties will accept it. Some people in the Arab world may entertain the idea that this is possible or feasible. And I suspect that this is what drove them to push for this international conference, which was so much in discussion until very recently. That if the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, that is the United States, Soviet Union, China, England, Great Britain and France will sit there and pontificate and make decisions for us, some people thought that this is doable. And rightly, Secretary of State said, we have wasted too much time on the procedures, that is, who will sit in the conference, who will make the decision, what will be the relationship between the plenary and the bilateral committees. Let's talk substance first. And if we manage to solve these questions in substance, then the whole issue of the international conference will be solved by itself or will become irrelevant. And indeed, there is this international event in the US concept, current concept, but it's, as far as I understand it, and they haven't really crystallized it in the fine details, there is some international event, but it's not going to be that important as was supposed to be a couple of months ago. At the same time, there is recognition in the area that the United States is the only possible honest broker. And that the United States is the only outside power which can mediate between the various sides to the conflict. And this is one of the reasons why we say to our friends in Washington, whatever your ideas about the solution may be, don't pronounce them, because you may impair your ability to act as an honest broker. Sooner or later, when we are in negotiations, I think that the United States, as it happened in the case of Camp David and the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, the United States will express its view, to put it diplomatically, to one side or another, and then will be able to bridge the gap, as it happened in the case of Egypt and Israel. But don't do it prior to the beginning of the negotiations. And don't make it difficult for one side or another to go into these negotiations knowing that it goes with a handicap or an advantage. And that is that the US already made its position clear. Where are the problems? And there are many. I will start from the outside and get to Israel itself at the end. Basically, we are talking about three major partners to the negotiations: Jordanians, Palestinians, and the Israelis. I already dealt with some of the problems among the Palestinians. To caption it again, I would say that the main difference between the Jewish community and the Palestinian community during this long history of conflict was, once again, the ability of the Jewish leadership to say to itself, this is what is available. We rather make use of what is available now, and we'll go further from there. The Palestinian community was always led by people or elements who believed that they can get the whole loaf and nothing but that, and this is what they will accept and nothing less than that. It is, I think, paramount for the success that a moderate leadership emerges somehow from this chaos among the Palestinians, which is able to say, we missed an opportunity in 1947 when the UN gave us an Arab state, a Palestinian state. We missed an opportunity in 1978 with Camp David. We are not going to miss this one too. And it's not easy. I'm not saying that it's possible. It may take time. And time is of essence here. Jordan. The Palestinians are divided into three major groups. One Israeli Arabs, 700,000 of them, living in Israel as Israeli citizens, voting for our parliament, the Knesset, being elected to the Knesset, full rights. The only difference is that they are exempted from military service. Second group is the Palestinians living in the territories in question, 1.4 million of them. The third group, and the largest one, 2 million Palestinians in Jordan, being the backbone of the Hashemite kingdom, with very strong links, family and others, to the Palestinians in Judea, Samaria, and the Gaza Strip. Any solution, or the absence of a solution, may be detrimental to these three groups, and therefore to Israel and Jordan. If you asked me, do you know what the king wants, King Hussein that is, I won't be able to answer that, not because I've never spoken to the king, but because I don't know whether he knows the answer. Basically, what he did for the last 20 years is to make all the possible statements, sit on the fence, and do nothing. The question is the king able now, given the situation, come forward and join the negotiations? Then I come to my own state. And I'll say right in the beginning of that part, Israeli society is divided. There's a wide range of agreement on many issues, but there's also division. The agreement is on the need to have secure boundaries, which means that no major party in Israel, put it this way, I would say 90–95% of the Israelis do not envisage, do not accept as a possibility going back to the 67 borders. There is an opposition to a Palestinian state, which I think is shared by Jordan as well, given the intricacies of the situation and the demographic problem. There is unanimity in Israel about the need to keep Jerusalem united under Israeli sovereignty. But beyond that, I have to admit there is disagreement about the territorial aspect of the solution, the final status of the territories in question. Among other reasons, this is, to my mind, a very important reason why we should go through the transitional stage or the interim stage. So everyone concerned, whether it's Jordan, the Palestinians, and Israel, have the time to find out, to get accustomed to living with each other, not being controlling each other, or make it possible for a responsible leadership emerge for the first time among the Palestinians, and see whether these three units can somehow work together. And from there, go into, I hesitate to say, a final solution because of certain reasons, but I would use it in that context. I think that because of that, the Secretary's upcoming visit is of tremendous importance. He has certainly part, not the whole of the key, but part of the key to a solution. There are many expectations pinned on his visit. But at the same time, we have to be realistic and hope that something, at least partial, transitional, comes out and we enter into a peace process which will lead to the final settlement of this conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister Eran will answer questions until 10 minutes after 7. Yes, sir.
Mr. Meadows, in view of the fact that Jordan had control over the West Bank between 1948 and 67, and they had a people there that wanted to either become part of Jordan or have their own state, how would you compare the action by the Jordanians at that time with the position that Israel is conducting with the present protest?
To repeat the question, would you compare the conduct and behavior of the Jordanians in the 20-year period in which they controlled the West Bank with the present conduct of the Israeli government in the area?
To begin with, I want to say that I am willing to go beyond 10 minutes past 7 to answer the question. It's not my veto on time. But it's an interesting question. In 48, as a result of rejection, or part of the rejection of the UN partition plan, the Arab states waged war against the newly born Israeli state. And the Jordanians occupied what came to be known as the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and annexed it. In 1950, they annexed it. Because of that, they were almost kicked out of the Arab League, because of the annexation. And indeed, to this very day, or until 1967, only 2 states recognized this occupation by the Jordanians. It was Great Britain and Pakistan. But they were there between 48, as you said, and 1967. What is more interesting that how they treated their population is why haven't they given the Palestinian state of their own? I mean, now you can say the Israelis don't want, whether you understand it, whether you accept it, they don't want to give the Palestinian state of their own. Well, why didn't the Jordanians, or why didn't the Arabs, especially after they all rejected the annexation, why did they didn't press the Jordanians to grant the Palestinians their own state or autonomy or whatever? As to the treatment, first of all, I don't think that comparisons are very valid. We are talking about 2 different societies. This part of the world, or the other side of the Jordan River, there are things that are being done, permitted sometimes they are legal, in order to curb any opposition. In 85, if I'm not mistaken, or 86, there were riots in the Yarmouk University, which is a Jordanian university, and in no time the police was there. 8 people were killed the first day, and that was the end of it. Well, I belong to a different society, and I will be the first one to say that wherever there was an excessive use of force, I am ashamed. I had a meeting today with a congressman who said, your problem is that you don't close out the West Bank to the TV crews and to the press. I don't accept it, I'm sorry. You may clap your hands, but I don't accept it. I think that part of the affinity between the United States and Israel is that we share the same values, that we are a free democracy, and that means a free press. And so therefore, and I don't have anything to hide. I think that the measures that we are taking, by and large, are the right measures. We don't want to use live ammunition. No Palestinian was killed because a soldier, or a civilian for that matter, was given instructions to go and kill Palestinians. So, once again, I belong to a different society with a different set of values, and I don't see what is the value of comparing. It won't make my status or Israel's status on the West Bank or the Gaza Strip, for that matter, better or worse than the Jordanians or the Egyptians, for that matter.
This microphone, please. He defers to that microphone, please.
First, I'd like to give a comment about King Hussein sitting on the fence. He did assimilate all those Palestinians into his government, gave them all the rights to every Jordanian, and even some of them are generals in the Air Force in Jordan.
I think I said that they are the backbone of the Hashemite kingdom.
Okay, but he didn't do anything for any of the Palestinians. My question is this, and I knew someone personally, several people, in 1967, were working for the Army Corps of Engineers, working on maps that had strategic points in Jordan and in the West Bank, and were specifically given to the Israelis. Also, during the early 1980s, late 1979, the Army Corps of Engineers also went over on the West Bank, tore down marketplaces, and what they had...
I'm sorry, I didn't follow the last sentence.
Well, the Army Corps of Engineers, I know several people that went over there with bulldozers on the West Bank, tore down marketplaces, and they were laughing at that because they figured that was the only economy or social realm that the Palestinians would have. By destroying this, it would destroy an internal genocide of the Palestinians. They were over there. I want to know what capacity was the Army Corps of Engineers over in the West Bank? Were they under as advisors of bulldozers, or were they under military advisors?
The question is, what was the Army Corps of Engineers doing on the West Bank?
The United States, rightly, wrongly, fortunately, unfortunately, has a very clear stand on this issue. Not only that, but I'll tell you, whenever U.S. officials come to Israel, and we want to take them to show them the strategic importance of Judea and Samaria, the relevance to the future solution, we cannot take them not only to Nablus, we cannot take them to the eastern side of Jerusalem. So it's inconceivable to me that any U.S. unit, military or civilian, was doing anything of the sort on the West Bank. It's just inconceivable.
Now, would you like to ask a question?
In following up on your statement about keeping the television cameras or cutting the cables off the television cameras, it seems as though the violence in South Africa, once it stopped being reported on the evening news, dropped off considerably.
Let's ask the question as quickly as you can.
If the solution to the Palestinian problem is going to have to be a political solution, and in order for a political solution to be reached, knowing that cooler heads have to prevail, then why can't, just for a short period of time, we give up our desire to have a free press, simply to allow cooler heads to prevail, so that we don't have to see 11 and 12-year-old kids getting shot?
I think the gentleman would like you to elaborate on your earlier statement that you believe indeed the media should be on the West Bank.
I'm tempted to say that I've answered the question, but let me say that I don't accept the equation to South Africa for many reasons, and I think we're dealing with a different situation and different values. We don't deal with apartheid here. There's no discrimination against any Palestinian because he is a Palestinian or Muslim or anything of the sort. It's a political conflict, and this is how it should remain and solved as such. Secondly, I honestly don't believe that if I close out the West Bank or down the West Bank to the TV crews, that will create a different situation. I think that the margins are so small between having the TV or not having them that I rather pay the price. And barring certain circumstances where I declare an area as a military or under emergency military situation, other than that, I don't see any reason for that. On the contrary, if we do that, I can see a situation where rumors are being spread about 2,000 kids who were slaughtered by this Jewish occupation. I know what happened in the first day of Lebanon. I was there as a soldier. I was a military, in my military reserve service, I was called. And the first day, we had on the western front of the Lebanese battlefield, we have 6 Lebanese killed. And the figure given in the press was 60,000. Because the first day, the Israeli army decided there won't be any press. So why not 60,000? This was the figure which was given to the press by the PLO. I don't need this. I don't have anything to hide. I regret every loss of life, but I have nothing to hide there, and therefore I don't see any reason for closing down or out the West Bank for the press.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm interested in the long run. I'm talking about 50, 100 years from now. Let's say that Israel still retains control over portions of the West Bank. And given the demographics of the Arab birth rate versus the Jewish birth rate, you find yourself as controlling a piece of territory occupied by people of 3 religions and 2 nationalities. Now, it seems to me you have 2 choices then. One is to follow the South African model of inserting the hegemony of one nation, one ethnic group, one religious group at all costs. The other is possibly the Swiss model, where all ethnic groups, all religious language groups have the same identity, the same rights, and the nation exists as a quadruple ethnic group. It seems to me you have a choice between maintaining your democracy or maintaining your Jewish identity. Now, somewhere if you think of Switzerland and South Africa on a continuum, do you know where on the continuum you want to be?
The question, I believe, is would you comment on the dilemma created for Jewish identity in a democratic state occasioned by the demographics in the West Bank?
I knew it was not going to end at 7:10.
We won't extend it 50 or 100 years.
I think, though, that's a very serious question. And this is exactly on which the Israelis are divided among themselves. Although, I hasten to say that as an Israeli, whatever your views are, no one wants to rule or control 1.5 million Palestinians. And that is even those who say that for historical reasons, for security reasons, for emotional reasons and religious reasons, and they are very valid reasons, Judea and Samaria should be part of Israel. Even those people say we cannot control them, we have to find a political solution. Some of them say, yes, it means that we have to make them Israeli citizens. And they are not blind, they see the demographic issue just as you see them, I mean the numerical element of it. And indeed, if you did it today, this will mean a society which will have 60% Jews and 40% Arabs. There are those who will say, well, when the State of Israel was established in 1948, we were 660,000 Jews in 1948, and there were about 250,000 Arabs. And we don't know what the birth rate will be 50 years from now, not among Jews and not among Arabs. And we don't know what the size of Jewish immigration will be from the Soviet Union, for example. It's not very promising now, but who knows? I mean, you're talking about a time scale of 25, 50, 100 years. I should have started by saying that according to Jewish tradition, after the destruction of the Second Temple, prophecy was given to fools only, and refrain from answering the next question, but we don't know. There are those who say that regardless of the numerical equation, we don't want it, because we want to remain predominantly a Jewish state and a democratic state. That is exactly the nature of the argument in Israel. There's no way I want or can hide it. And that is why Prime Minister Begin at the time, and he belongs to the party which says these parts, we have a claim to these parts of the land, he was the one who devised self-rule for the Palestinians. This is the sort of question which has no solution, an immediate solution, because it is not something which you can sit around a table and make a decision about it. It has to come, it has to emerge from a period of living together, of having an ongoing political process, which will produce the answer to that. I can't give you an answer now. I can give you a personal answer, but it's irrelevant. This is exactly what I'm talking about when I say, let's start this political process from which the solution to your question will come. And it's the question. I agree. It's the question.
I believe you're next, Mr. Bloomberg.
Recently, in November in Eran, there was a meeting at which time the press report stated that King Hussein gave the veto power to the Saudis about any arrangement that could be entered into with Israel. There was also a report that he gave the same veto powers to the Syrian foreign minister. Now, since the Saudis are bankrolling the Syrians, since the Saudis are bankrolling the Jordanians, would it be fair to say that the key figure, if there's any progress to be made in peace in the Mideast, is in Saudi Arabia?
Would you comment on the proposition that Saudi Arabia is the key to peace in the Middle East?
For several reasons, among them 10.7, I say no, and that's it. I don't know, seriously, no, it's not. The key is not in Saudi Arabia. The Saudis will do whatever is acceptable to the Egyptians, whatever is acceptable to the Jordanians, whatever is acceptable to the Syrians. I don't know what is acceptable to them, and nor is it known to the Saudis, but this is what they will do. They are mainly interested in the survival of their own royal family and the kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And on a serious note, though, I would add that in this context, the Saudis may be frightened of a Palestinian state too. But the key is not in Riyadh. It's not there. They cannot, if King Hussein does not want to go to the negotiations, they are unable to tell him to go. If the king does want to go, and presumably he got the blessing from the Egyptians first and the Syrians, the Saudis won't be able to prevent him. So the key is not in Riyadh.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
In your historical review, you mentioned one element which appears to me to be genuinely new, and that is Islamic fundamentalism. I wonder if you could comment on how Islamic fundamentalism over recent years has influenced the prospects for peace. And in particular, I wonder if you could comment on what influence it may have had on Arabs who live in Israel or Israeli citizens.
Would you comment on the impact that Muslim fundamentalism has had on the peace process in the Middle East, and particularly on the behavior of Muslims within your borders?
I have to admit that we are dealing with an unknown quantity for the time being. I gave you one evidence of what happened recently in Judea and Samaria or the Gaza Strip, when we found, or when we heard, you don't have to go search for it, you can hear over the loudspeakers